Thank you, Ben. And I guess I can invite you all up, and please, if anybody has any questions, I guess we can start back there. Just come on up.
So it seems like there's maybe two different conflicting ideas going on. And one of the earlier talks talked about how by concentrating on the feed ground is going to reduce the transmission to branches, but you're also talking about, like the last two, how if you eliminate feeding early, you reduce the prevalence of the transmission of it as well. So how do you kind of rectify those two kind of different ideas?
I can show you a picture of what we're talking about on early in dates. So like this scenario here, where you can clearly see that these elk are not stranded on this feed ground because the snow's too deep for them to move anywhere else or find any other native forage. We continue feeding here because the elk were not leaving on their own. Primarily because we're feeding pretty high-grade alfalfa hay. So they can either eat high-grade green alfalfa hay on the feed ground, or they can move up on the slopes and eat old dried-out grass from the year before. And so they're keying in on staying in this feeding scenario where they have all the ability to actually move up into the native winter ranges, up in these hill slopes. So this is what we're trying to avoid, is feeding elk later into the season than we truly need to. These elk typically want to leave feed grounds as kind of the snow recedes. They try to follow that snow line or the green up. But when we're offering high quality hay on the feed ground, they typically stay. So what we've worked with our feed ground managers to do is to shift the way that we feed. So as that snow begins to recede, we begin to reduce feeding rations, and we also try to convert over from alfalfa hay to grass hay, so that there's not that another key or another restriction for those elk to move. If they have the option to eat grass hay or to move up on the native range, typically they'll begin to follow that snow line. So that's what we're talking about on early end dates, is not feeding later than we really need to, based on weather patterns.
I might add to it. There's a really good explanation by Ben. Not every feed ground can do this at. There's certain feed grounds that are in very close proximity to livestock ranches and fairly deep snow country, and so trying to taper those animals off generally isn't an option, or taper off the feeding season on those feed grounds. There are several other targeted feed grounds as part of our target feed ground program, which is what these two actions are sort of the foundation of that program. Basically, feed grounds that don't have close proximity to livestock and tend to be more in kind of fringe winter range type settings. So that's where we're able to, I guess, implement some of these management actions. Yeah, good question.
Good.
Have you ever worked at all, one of the strategies you spoke about was looking at work with the committee during specific times, during specific years when there's drought and have you done any of that yet? Have you learned any lessons? What I'm thinking about is some of the strategies we're talking about, keeping the permittee back on certain years. During those years, oftentimes, we want the permittee be out there early because there's a chance they're going to. So the risk reward there with the permittee is more of a risk reward with managing the waste possibility, or with managing the fact that they change their operation needs and something else.
So the question was, how much work have we done, we as an agency, Wyoming Game and Fish, done in working with various permitting agencies, whether it be U.S. Forest Service or BLM or even individual, I think you're getting at individual permittees as well. So the data, we essentially have provided data when we first started out, and over time collecting more information, and which became maps. And then we have one of those in particular in terms of risk is the parturition areas. Those have tended to expand. And we have provided the information to the permitting agencies to let them know, and they're well aware of, you know, the dates, which really the part, or at least the abortion period, hasn't really changed. Some of the locations, when we talked with some individual permittees that I have good relations with, they're like, oh yeah, we located vertically, we just didn't have the information, you know, and documented it. How much they're actually changing, you know, as far as like across the board, I don't know. I think, you know, I guess to answer the second part of your question, you're talking about drought. And maybe this is a question that Jared can answer. I think that a lot of times they do, and this is just my opinion, they will get out there, try to get out and get on the range where they can. But in just working with various range conservationists, a lot of times they'll kind of get held, they might get held back. So I think it's pretty wide variability. There's not a one size fits all strategy to it. So, and I hope that answers your questions. We can talk.
So in my research, I haven't talked to the Forest Service about it, but my vision of research and how we set it up is that those snow years I was talking about, you can assess that in late February. And then once you know what kind of snow years you're in, then you can pick what simulation or what prediction that we're using for the future, so maybe we can alter turnout dates like that. Does that make sense? So the way we set it up, you can make a decision in late February for what you're going to do 2 months later. That's kind of the idea.
Who's moderating this?
Yeah.
I'm moderating. Chris?
The first question again is that there was a spatial component to that. And I think the question was, there seems to be two recommendations that you talked about. You want to keep the algorithm
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. I'll be right there. There's no sense in that category thing right now. Dang it, nice.
And I think the future might be having to do with spatial scales. That on a big spatial scale, you want to keep it contained, but within the small spatial scale, you want to disperse within the feedback. I think, am I on the right track here?
Yeah, so the question is, there's some, I guess, disparity between the management strategies, either trying to constrain elk to a feed ground, which is one strategy to prevent transmission to livestock, versus spreading elk out. And yes, you kind of answered your own question. So in feed grounds, and this gets in a previous question, so in some scenarios, we don't have the ability to turn elk out or shut feed ground down early. And a strategy where in most of our feed grounds, except some that are in very tight canyons, we're able to disperse elk, you know, using the strategy of low density feed. So does that answer? As you say, it is a matter of scale.
Right. But there's not rivers in the sea conflict, there's not really conflict.
Right.
Okay, one last question.
So I had a question that kind of ties into the discussion about bison, and I understand this work. Has there been any discussion about changing current management of bison? I can't answer that. I don't know.
it's always great when you bring together scientists and managers, and it's awesome as the moderator and BiSci biologist for y'all to avoid that question. So how about a round of applause to the presenters?